Hey, welcome everyone to our tips and tricks for hosting a virtual class meetup. Just to start off with, a couple of little bits of housekeeping. First of all, if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the comments box. I'll be checking it throughout the session, so if there's anything, please feel free to ask. We've already had one from John. What district are you? I'm actually not in a district in the US, John. I'm over in Australia. So I'm based in Victoria. So that's where I'm based here. Other bit of housekeeping, just in terms of the recording, it will be available on here afterwards. So just after the live session, it will be available on Facebook, so you'll be able to watch it on there. So to go over a few bits and pieces, I'm just going to make my camera a little bit smaller just so that you can see my screen a bit. A little bit about me. So my name is John. Up until 2018, I was a classroom teacher. So I've taught both here in Australia and in the UK. In the UK, I taught all the way down to nursery, which is 4-year-olds. So that was fun. And then I've taught up to year 12, which is senior years here in Australia. But I spent most of my time in the middle school. I taught math, science, and drama. So my passion and the reason that I do this job is I love making things easier for teachers through the use of tech. And so hopefully what I'm hoping to do as part of this particular session is try and make your life a little bit easier through this particular time. In my spare time, I am studying. I'm doing my master's in positive psychology. I also enjoy theatre, baking, reading, and all things Disney. I do plan regular trips to various Disney parks, so I have a lot of fun doing that. So just to start, we just thought I'd talk about the difference between online learning and virtual meetings because they are key differences, and then the purpose of what this session actually is. So online learning is all about how students receive their instruction and content over the internet using electronic devices and digital media and all those sorts of things. This is outside the traditional classroom. So within the classroom, we often use these online tools, but online learning is happening outside the actual traditional classroom. On the other hand, a virtual meeting is a tool that is used to assist in online learning. So obviously allow people to connect via audio and video from different locations. The whole point of this session is to look at how you can successfully use virtual meetings to assist in your online learning. So that's kind of what we're focusing on today. So we're not necessarily focusing on online learning as general, we're really specifically looking at these virtual meetings. So the big question is, why would you host one of these? Why would you host a virtual class meetup? The first one is really simple, just to connect. In times like this, particularly if schools are closed, then students can feel really disconnected. It's really lovely to hear those stories about how kids are setting up their own little chats and things like that. But you can find that students can end up feeling really disconnected. So that's one of the key things about it, just to connect. One of the ones that you could do is you could do a virtual read aloud. So if you wanted to read a story to the students, you can easily do that, no problems at all. Obviously, you can teach a lesson or provide instruction. So you're able to get this content out to your students. You can also use this time to have students share some of the content that they're creating as well throughout this time. So it's great to be interactive as part of it. Now, as part of this, there are a whole range of different platforms. So some of the ones that we've identified are just these ones. So Zoom, Google Hangouts and Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, Skype, GoToMeeting, WebEx. So just thought I'd show you a couple of them if you're not familiar with them. I thought I'd have a quick look at a few of them to go through them. So Zoom, first of all, Zoom is one that we use quite a lot. And so this is what Zoom looks like when you first load. So there's two ways you can use Zoom. You can use it either as just on the spot. You can start in your own private meeting room, or you can create scheduled meetings. So you can send out meeting rooms to your class or whoever it is that you're sending to. Now, my personal preference is to set up scheduled ones. The reason for that is if you send students the link to your personal meeting room, it means that they can join it at any time. That doesn't mean that they can join it at 2 o'clock in the morning and they'll suddenly see you sleeping, anything like that. However, if you're in a meeting with somebody else in your personal meeting room and a student joins, they can get into it. So I always suggest setting up a scheduled one. So obviously you can just do that using the schedule button, but just to very quickly show you the interface, when you do a new meeting, now I will apologize, this may slow down slightly just because I have 2 webcams running in order for this to work. So what it will do is it will first ask you how you want to join. So I'm going to join with my computer audio. You can join with phone audio if you're on a mobile device. So you've got some options there. Now, in terms of inviting, you've got this button down here so you can send out the link. So if I click invite, I can send emails, or there's a copy URL button down here. Now, in this as well, in the manage participants, it's really good to know. This is where I can actually control the different people in here. So I can mute people, those sorts of things. So we'll talk about muting later. If I do want to mute my own, I can simply hit that mute button there, and then anyone who's on the call won't be able to hear me. Similarly, I can also turn off my video. So if for whatever reason I just need to quickly turn it off, I can do that, no worries at all. Now, there are a whole bunch of other cool things that Zoom can do, and we'll talk about some of those later. Now, the other one that you can use, I'll talk about recording later on. It's just going to bring up another pop-up in a sec. There it is. The other one that you can use is Teams. Now, Teams is one that will be set up depending on what you have within your school. Now, sometimes Teams will look slightly different depending on your setup within the individual class or within the individual school, district, whatever you're in. But the easiest way to start a call is when you're in the particular team. So I'm currently in my test team here. There's a button down here that says Meet Now, and it's got a little picture of a camera. If I click on that, it will start up. I can add a subject, so I can do maths class, click Meet Now, and then that will start going. Okay, so so works very similar. And then when I'm finished, I simply hit the hang up and it will end it. So that's my Teams. Now, the final one to show is Google Hangouts. Now, there is also what's called Google Meet. Now, Google Meet looks like this. Unfortunately, I can't show you Google Meet just because the way my setup is, it would only be, it's switched on for your company. So we don't have it switched on here, but it works very similar to Hangouts. So all it is, when you're ready to start a Meet or a Hangout, you just click on this video call button. It will bring up the relevant information that you need. Now, this one I don't think will access my other webcam, so I can't actually show you the full thing, but you get the idea. My webcam will appear here, and then I can invite people into my call, all those sorts of things, okay? So that's kind of the three main platforms that I've found that people are using. There are other ones, and it's kind of up to you. My personal preference is for Zoom, but that's just because that's what I'm used to. Other people have other preferences, and it's kind of up to you. Now, the other question that I've been asked is, what about Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Twitter Live, those sorts of ones? So they're really good for if you want to just deliver a lecture with a lot less interaction. So that's the downside to these sort of ones. They don't have a huge amount of interaction with them. Obviously, with Facebook Live, like you guys are doing, you're able to enter comments, and I can read those as we go along. However, they're not great for that more classroom interaction. They are really good, though. So, for example, I've seen a lot of schools talking about with Facebook Live or with Twitter Live, what they're doing is each night they're going on, doing a read-along, reading a story to all the kids in the school. So somebody from the school is doing it. Just as kind of like, that end of the day story. Really lovely idea to do. The key things about it, particularly with Facebook Live, is that you can either share your screen or show a video. You can't do both without using a third-party app. So I'm currently using a third-party app in order for you to be able to see my screen and for me to have video play. So I'm using an app called Loom. Really, really good. One of my colleagues at Vivi showed it to me last week, and I quite like it. There's a couple of little things that I'm ironing out with it, just as I'm having a play for the first time, but I don't mind it. So this is a way that you can get both the video and sharing a screen if you ever wanted to do that through one of your Facebook Lives, those sort of ones. So in terms of actually running a class meetup, there's a few things that I really recommend that you look at. The first one is preparation. My very first tip is practice. Get yourself a guinea pig. I'm happy to be your guinea pig if you want. If you ever want to practice with someone, I know that Catherine, who's my colleague in the US, so if you're based in the US and you want to do it during US time, she's more than happy to help as well. Just get in touch. we're always happy to test out with you. Test when you are doing that testing, test both your video and your audio and look at, make sure it all sounds okay, make sure it looks okay. So as an example, just before I did this one, I have just like a little fake group. I did a test in that, realized the audio was being weird, so played with some settings, fixed it up, it was all good to go. But the only reason I found that was because I did a test beforehand, which, it's really important to know that. Find the right spot to do it. Make sure, I always recommend that you have a plain background. So at the moment, I just have behind me, it's actually a window blind because I don't have a plain wall in my house. So that was the easiest way to get that nice plain background. Make sure you're in a quiet area. Avoid kind of large rooms if you can, particularly if you've got somewhere with a high ceiling. The sound will echo, and so it sounds a bit dodgy. So if you can, get into a quiet area with a lower ceiling, and try and make sure it's private, particularly at the moment where everyone's working from home and you've got family at home and things like that. Make sure you're in a room where you can't be disturbed. Now, I can tell you now, I'm not actually in a room where I can't be disturbed. However, I live at home alone, although I do have a cat. So at some point, my cat may come wandering across the screen. You never know. We'll see what happens. She's so far ignoring me, so that's a good thing. But you can see sometimes these things do happen. Which leads me on to my next one. Don't stress if something goes wrong, but have in your mind an alternative. So if you are planning on doing a Facebook, not a Facebook Live, some sort of live stream for whatever reason, whether you're teaching a lesson, whatever it is, make sure you're prepared with an alternative for it, just in case something doesn't work. But if something does go wrong, and it could be something as simple as a delivery person knocks on the front door, that's okay. You just explain it to whoever you're talking to. They're completely fine. They understand that these things happen. And then my final one, practice again. As I said, make sure you're doing lots of practice with it. Even though I've used Facebook Live multiple times, as I said, before I did this, I jumped in because for me, this was a new setup. I haven't actually done Facebook Live using this particular setup that I'm using today. So I thought I'm just going to jump in and make sure it's working. And I'm glad I did so that I could fix it. So make sure you're getting all that practice in. Now, next thing to talk about is your audio. Mute, really important. What you should do is you should ask everyone to mute themselves, because otherwise, if you've got 22 people on the call and they're all talking at once, it can get quite overwhelming. So ask people as they're entering to mute themselves. However, don't feel scared to mute everyone on their behalf. As I showed you in Zoom, you can do it really easily just with that Manage Participants button, and then you can just mute all the students in your class really easily. So I definitely recommend doing that. Secondly, some apps will let you dial in with your phone, which can be handy if the internet gets overwhelmed. So one of the things that's being talked about here in Australia a lot is that they're not sure with everyone working from home what that's going to do to the internet. So if the internet does start to get a little bit slow, some of them, I know that Zoom does and Hangouts does and a few others, you're able to dial into the call so that you can just get that little bit clearer audio. Make sure you use a headset or headphones. So this is the headset that I often use here. So it just has a little microphone on it. It's a USB port to go into it. It is quite a long cable as well, which can be really handy. I know that some people, I think Laura posted the other day in the Facebook group about the whiteboard that she's bought for at home. So I know some people are planning on having a board of some sort behind them and being able to move around. That's great. Make sure you get, therefore, a set of headphones with a decent length cord. If you're planning on using Bluetooth, some sort of Bluetooth headphones, that's great as well. I know that AirPods work quite well, so that can work. Your standard headphones that you would use just for your phone, they'll normally work as well. Just make sure it has a microphone on it. That's the key point, so that you've got that in there. So that's kind of my recommendation there. Just a couple of questions. Laura, I'll come back to your question about distributing it. I will come back to that one. And Catherine, mute is so important. Yes, well and truly. It's one that we talk about. And it's something that, obviously, so within our particular organisation, we have people who work all over the world. And so sometimes when we're having big meetups and things like that, we could have 20 people on the call. And so you've just got to make sure that everyone's muted. Now, with video, My first thing is you're all fine just to use the device's built-in webcam. I know, like I'm getting Facebook ads for people who are trying to sell me ridiculously high-definition webcams. In most cases, you just don't need them. They're really expensive and they're just not necessary. So I would just recommend use the built-in one. Most devices now have them, phones have them, everything like that. Just use the built-in one there. With a video, always encourage your students to turn the video on. Obviously, that could be a specific school thing. Some schools may say, no, we're not allowed to. Obviously, go with the school rules. But if they're fine with it, encourage the students to have that video on because it's really important. And obviously, make sure yours is on. I know what I'm like. I talk with my hands. You'll see me moving my hands around. It really helps build connection with whoever you're talking to. And it obviously allows participants to see your body language and facial expressions. As teachers, it's something that we rely on. It's something that, if you're using humour, you rely on your face for the kids to actually be able to get that you're using humour. So it's really important to do that. Yes, Laura, it's true. No one needs to see you in high definition at 8 a.m. Now, one thing that I always like to point out, double check whether or not your screen is mirrored. And this is something to check when you do a practice. Some devices will automatically mirror your image. And the reason for that is so that if I raise my left hand, so on my screen, it's just so that when I'm looking at myself, then it makes a lot more sense. So the image is often mirrored. Double check that just because it can be a little weird if you're trying to show a book or something like that. So just check. Most of them then have a setting to be able to flip the image around. So just double check it. Now, my final point is always assume that the video is on. Some of you might have seen there was a video that went viral a few days ago about an online meetup where one of the members decided to go to the bathroom partway through the meeting. Highly embarrassing, and now she will forever be known as that person who went to the bathroom during a meeting. But just always assume that that video is on. So even if you think you've turned it off, assume that it's there. Now, the chat function is really, really handy in a lot of apps. This can be really good, particularly if you've got a larger group in there. So if you've got a full class, if you're getting questions from students, it can be quite overwhelming if everyone's asking questions at once. So encourage the students to use that chat. So in Zoom, and all of them have a very similar function, but let me show you the Zoom one. So when I'm in there, once it connects, when I'm in there, there'll be a button for me to use the chat. So you'll see it down here. So what I can do with that chat, I can also select who I'm going to send the chat message to. So if a student wants to ask me a question privately, they can just choose my name, or they can choose everyone. Similarly, if I need to send a message to a student, I can do it privately or I can do it to everyone. So you just type the message in there. It just works like any chat does. So you can do that, no worries at all. Oh, that's fine. Actually, I will just do this. Now, as I said, it is better for your large groups. What I suggest is when you do get a comment, a little bit like I've been doing, read the person's name aloud. It makes it slightly more personal. So if you get a student from little Jane, then you can say, oh, that's a great question, Jane. Jane's asked, and then say the question, and then you can respond to it. It just helps to build that connection. If you are using video and you want to do questions where the students are actually asking them aloud, it's perfectly okay to have students raise their hand. So you can say to them, all right, guys, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and then you'll be able to throw to them and say, okay, Jane, what's your question? And then Jane can unmute, ask the question. Now, final recommendation is make it fun. Now, unfortunately, I didn't quite have one spare. I know that when Catherine did her version of this, she had a fake moustache. Unfortunately, I don't have one. I apologise, Catherine. Actually, I probably do have one somewhere in my box of theatre things. But a few bits and pieces that you can do. You can use virtual backgrounds, which is really fun to do in Zoom. So let's jump back into Zoom. The way you can do it in Zoom is just in your video settings. There's virtual background. Now, one thing to point out, let's see how it goes. So you can see that it's covering my face. The reason for that is because I'm on a darker background. So if you are on a nice pale background like a white, or obviously if you're on a green screen, then it will work quite nicely. In this particular situation, it may not work as well. So just be aware of that. Again, this is the sort of thing you can practice with. So just be aware just in case you try and do that. Let me jump back in there. Don't be a statue. Move around. You don't have to sit here like this the whole time and just stare at the screen and talk straight at the screen, because, let's be honest, kids will get bored with it. So make sure you're kind of moving around, having a bit of fun with it. Finally, props and books are great. So you can get out your books, read them to your students. So you can have a read along. You can do those sorts of things. It's perfectly okay. I actually like showing things to the camera. So I bring things up to the camera and show it to my class. So you can do all those sorts of things. So definitely get into it. One of the other things that is actually really good about this situation, it gives your students an insight into your life. So if you have a pet and the pet comes and harasses you during a class that you're running, pick it up and show it to the students. It's possibly something that you've talked about with your kids anyway. So all of a sudden they now see your cat or your dog live. So it can just add that little personal connection there. So what I'll do now, I'll just pause for any questions, just so you know there is a slight delay between when you type in a question and when I hear it. It's about 20 seconds. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to type them in now, and we'll respond to them. Going back, just while I'm waiting, going back to Laura's question about if there's a way to get a copy of the video and distribute it, then I can see that I'm assuming Emma is on as our on our Vivi account. Yes, we can send it to you after this session, so that's completely fine. We'll get it sent out to you. If anyone else does want it, I'll pop my email up at the end, so you can always shoot me through an email, and I'm more than happy to send you through a recording of it after the session is complete. So looks like we don't have any questions, but if anyone does have any, please feel free to continue typing them in. I will check again just before we finish. So obviously we're in the Education Exchange at the moment. Really encourage you to invite any colleagues into it, anyone that you have on Facebook. It can be, it's just turning into a really nice place to connect with people. And particularly at this time, just gives you a place to bounce ideas around, things like that. It's also really good because we've got people all over the world. If you have a random idea at 9 o'clock at night, chances are there's going to be somebody else online. So you'll be able to get responses to it that way. So just to wrap up, please feel free to follow us on any of our socials, check out our website, or there is my email address, so john@vivi.io. You're more than welcome to send me through an email. As I said, if you'd like a copy of the recording, just shoot me through an email and I will happily send that out to you once we've got it ready. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will hopefully speak to you all soon. Bye.